nodding and setting to work, pulling up the stone anchor and raising the sail on the mast. A few stragglers on the beach watch a weary Jesus disappearing out of sight, curling up to rest in the stern where he has spent the day teaching. One of the disciples hands him a cushion for under his head. As the wind catches the sail and the boat moves forward, one of the disciples, maybe Peter or Andrew, gently step around Jesus in the stern in order to steer. It's about 13 miles to the other side. As they get to somewhere near the middle of the lake, the breeze that had been powering their movement forward picks up. It accelerates suddenly from breeze to wind to all-out storm. The waves grow higher, crashing against the boat, spilling over to swamp it. Now, these sudden storms weren't uncommon. The Galilee was known for its unpredictable windstorms. The geography of the place just made it prone to violent gusts that stirred up the waves. But even the experienced fishermen, Peter, Andrew, James, and John, they can tell that this storm is stronger than most. And when the rest of them see that the fishermen are anxious, well, they too become unnerved. They look to the stern. Jesus, so bone-tired, is sound asleep, even with the bouncing and the splashing and the howling of the wind. Someone shakes him from his much-needed rest, and they cry out to him, "Don't you care that we are perishing?" He stands up, steady as a rock. He scolds the wind, and he commands the sea, "Be still." It's as if they were naughty children up to some kind of boisterous mischief. Simple as that. The wind and the sea immediately obey. The storm subsides even more quickly than it appeared, as if it's shamed into a hasty retreat by Jesus' admonishment. Problem solved. The disciples are slack-jawed. Their awe overtakes their fear. And now Jesus turns his attention to them. "Why are you afraid?" he asks. "Have you still no faith?" His voice turning from its powerful and unwavering tone to a more gentle tone that's maybe even a little sad. See, the confidence, the trust with which he slept on his cushion in the stern, it didn't yet belong to the disciples. Even as they have witnessed his power to heal, standing by his side under fierce opposition from the Pharisees, and while he cast out evil spirits. The confidence, the trust, the peace that fills Jesus is born out of his close relationship with God. The beloved Son, in the midst of all different kinds of turbulence, be it actual or a metaphorical storm, but Jesus stays the course, and he steers by his faith. He wants the disciples to know this peace, to trust that the storms can and will be weathered. God is always present, faithful, steadfast. It's another attribute in the kingdom. In the kingdom, there is a new brand of courage to face life's struggles. I think one of the hardest struggles that we all face, each of us, throughout our lives, is transition. It is that uncertain time, that traveling from one place to another. We're no longer where we were, and we still aren't to where we're headed. We can feel like we're nowhere at all. Like we're untethered, like we're anchorless, tossed about somewhere in the middle. We can't turn back, and we don't know what we will encounter as we move ahead. Grief is perhaps one of the most powerful transition times. We're not in the place that we were before our loved one died, or before our divorce was final, or before our job fell victim to corporate downsizing, or before chronic illness or aging robbed us of our capacity for daily tasks. We can't deny the change, the loss, the emptiness from the absence of what was. But neither can we deny that it's a long way to travel before we arrive at the other side. And there will be sudden storms arriving in bouts of tears, or those days when we are weighed down with despair, afraid that we will never feel secure or at peace again. We find ourselves asking, Jesus, don't you care? I'm perishing, or at least it feels like I am, because a part of my life has perished. Even in times of joyful change that we choose, change that we celebrate, like new jobs, a new home, a marriage, a growing family, leaving for college, or retirement. Even then, there are feelings of grief, loss, a time of transition. The disciples are in a boat, a mode of transportation. They're traveling from one side of the lake to the other. And for those 13 miles across the Galilee, they're in transition. They're no longer in Capernaum, but they're still not at their destination. And as the storm brews up, well, that short trip begins to feel like it's an epic trek to the other side of the world. In a few days, 6 of our youth and their 2 adult leaders will travel to Houston for the youth gathering. This seemingly short trip and their time in Houston will put them into transition. When they return, they will be different than they were when they left, even though that journey is round trip. They'll meet new people. Their view of a faith that's usually contained within their homes and their own prayers and the walls of their church, well, that view will widen and their faith will deepen, expanding perhaps more quickly than it ever has before in their lives. And worshiping in a stadium with 30,000 people, hearing the faith stories of courageous and bold speakers, and being sent into new opportunities for serving others. Both adults and youth alike can't help but be changed. When they return, how they see the world will be different, and therefore how they move and live in the world as disciples, as people of faith, will be different. In a few more weeks, Stephanie and Jordan Corey and I will be on a plane, crossing continents and oceans. Another round trip that will nevertheless put us into a transition. No doubt we will experience some turbulence on that long flight. We'll experience some uncertainty. We're not at home, but we're not yet to Tanzania. Like those traveling to Houston, our view of the world and how we move through it as Jesus' disciples will expand. It will deepen. Though I've been there before, I'm not immune to the transition of this trip. I can't help but wonder what will take place this time. I mean, sure, we have an itinerary, but there are intangibles that cannot be planned. I came home last time and I wasn't the same. And when I return now, I'll be different than when I left them. And when I come home, I will be changed yet again. So it is now for our lives together here at Gloria Day. Back in mid-May, we entered transition. We're traveling from one place to another. We're no longer where we were, but we've not yet arrived to where Jesus is taking us. But Jesus is pointing us to the other side, to something new, to something different. But there's a distance to travel before we get there. The journey will be what it will be, and there's no shortcuts to this destination. In the uncertainty, out in the middle of the lake, we will experience some fear. Perhaps it may even rattle our faith. We might even say to Jesus, "Don't you care?" So here is the word of truth that the Gospel of Mark holds for us today. Jesus was with us where we used to be. And Jesus is pointing us to the other side, so it must be a place where we're needed. And Jesus is with us in transition. And Jesus will continue on with us when we get there. The peace, the confidence, the trust with which Jesus sleeps soundly in the stern of the boat at the height of the storm, he wants that for us. Jesus is able to still the storm. And even in our doubt and fear, in our grief, the calm that he brings to rough waters is a calm he intends for us. Really, if we look at it closely, this whole life of discipleship that started in the waters of our baptism and continues on every day of our life is constant transition. It's a transition into the change that God's grace brought about and brings about in our lives. Each day of this transition is a day given for living more fully into those changes. It moves me and you from fear to trust. It moves us from living for me to living for we. God's grace moves us from sinner to forgiven, from captivity to freedom, from despair to hope, from death to life. Daily, Jesus invites us into the boat, and he steers us always in the direction of the kingdom. He moves us forward, taking us to places that need the good news, that need healing and the freedom that Jesus ushers in. When the disciples and Jesus arrive at the other side, Jesus will cast a legion of demons out of a man. And that act will set both the man and the community that struggles to care for him free. Well, I would say that's worth the trip, wouldn't you? So even as rough waters rise up within transition, there are also landmarks of progress, and there will be ports to stop and rest. In 2 weeks, the council will meet with Reverend Eric Carlson, who serves as an assistant to Bishop Burke. He will conduct an exit interview with Pastor Randy, and he will guide your council and me to determine what's needed to navigate to the other side. We're moving forward together in the boat with Jesus through this process of transition, 1 mile across the lake at a time. On the last trip that I made to Tanzania, Kathy, Diane, Karen, and I were taken up the mountain to see the freshwater source and the holding tank that had been built there by our partnership. We weren't in a boat. We were traveling on foot. It was all uphill, the path was narrow, the air was thin, and we started to ask periodically, how much longer till we're there? We didn't know the way, and we had to trust our hosts and the path that they were leading us on. And every time we asked that question of how much longer, the answer was soon. We rested, we sipped water, we climbed on. It seemed that soon couldn't come soon enough, but that word soon also held a promise that we would indeed arrive. And then at last, one step at a time, soon happened, and we were there. In this transition, in every transition throughout our lives, in our movement from one place to another, Jesus is present, he is with us. Through time and over distance, His promise that we will arrive soon can be seen in his trust that allows him to sleep in that stern. The promise that we will arrive soon is seen in his power to still the storm. His promise that we will arrive soon is seen in his desire for the deepening of our faith. And once and for all, his promise that we will arrive soon is seen in his death and resurrection. On the other side, beyond where we've been, in Jesus, there will always be new life. Amen.